All right. So our next speaker is Dayna Matthews. Dayna has a fascinating story to tell us about the intersection of law and medicine and how it affects different members of our society and impacts our healthcare. And Dayna, please.
Thanks so much. So right off the bat, they told me to use a loud voice. I am a total antithesis to the wonderful talk that you just heard, which is calm and gentle and quiet. I'm going to try not to wave all my arms around. Let me first say thank you. My parents always told me to thank people. And I have to tell you, since I used to live here in Boulder for 14 years, I was dying to get an invitation to the Gold Symposium. So Larry, thank you so much for an invitation to this symposium. It's a dream come true for me. It was made possible by my dear friend Nelson Trujillo. Thank you very much, and thank you to Meredith and all the organizers very much. Everything else is my fault. So the first thing I'll tell you is that the title in the program I'm going to depart from, because as I realize that most of you are not physicians and clinicians that have patients, I thought it better to generalize and talk about why law can be bad for all of our health. And this I hope to be a little bit provocative about, because the law I'm going to talk about is my area of specialty, which is civil rights and constitutional law, and we try to repair discrimination, which I'm going to argue is also bad for your health. Not just my health, for obvious reasons, but for everybody's health. So I'm going to do it by answering these questions. I'm going to say, when is law bad? Just to give us a level set for the kinds of problems I'm talking about solving. How does it work? And then I'm going to ask you to stick with me for a couple of minutes while I'll take you to law school. So you read in my bio, I'm a law dean, and I'm going to do a little basic law with you. I promise not to bore you to tears, but I need to lay that foundation in order to give you the closing. That is what you can do about it. So when is law bad for your health? Basically, law has been bad for your health as long as we've had law. So we've seen law do some terrible things, right? Because law organizes our society and takes the moral bases on which we think we agree and then institutionalizes and enlarges them, right? So how do you sell women by the pound? By making it legal, right? How do you sell human beings who look like me by the pound? By making it legal, protecting those property rights, those sale rights, and making sure that we reinforce them with a legal system that lets the perpetrator know that they're okay with society, right? And so that's the function of law. This is a story, I don't even have time to tell you how horrible it is, but it's a story of a legal case that turned on a ship that lost its way and therefore lost its ability to feed everybody on board. But it was a slaver ship, and so they took the enslaved, threw them overboard because why not? They were in the way. But the real legal component that made this all right was that when the owner got back to England, the owner was able to recover for what? Insurance on the property that they lost, right? So legal systems do a great job. Jim Crow laws are familiar to you. The laws that put Japanese people into internment camps, these are all very bad laws, right? I want to get you accustomed to the fact that law can be really a bad thing, right? Law can mess up, and when it does, it's usually because it dehumanizes other people. Now, I would love to have a conversation with Dr. Freeman about the connection between detachment and attachment and trauma and dehumanization. I bet there's some connections there. But what I see law doing is doing the work of enforcing our view that others are unlike us enough that we don't have to treat them as humans, right? Most of the discrimination and most of the civil rights law that I try and enforce grows out of an assumption that we have to tell ourselves, right? How do you throw another human being overboard and then give people recovery for it? It's not a human being. It's something a little bit different or different enough that they don't feel like me, they don't emote like me, right? They don't have the same humanity as I have, because that's the only way you can live with yourself. That's the only way that you can construct a system that does this. And this is why I maintain that dehumanization is at the bottom of all discrimination. Probably there's more to that, but social scientists tell us there are lots of effects of dehumanization that I see in the law that I see embodied in those laws that act upon us in unhealthy ways. And you can see in the list of the things that dehumanization accomplishes according to social psychologists, but it's that bottom one that I'd really like us to focus on for the rest of my talk, right? That bottom one that says dehumanization insulates a society and individuals from the guilt of inequality, injustice, and restriction of freedoms, right? You can do that to another because they are so different from you and so unlike you, because you couldn't do it to yourself, and you couldn't do and allow the injustice and inequality that's happening to another happen to one who is as human as you. All right, so what I suggest to you is that law legalizes dehumanization. I'm very thirsty, but I'm afraid, because I am not as calm as Dewey Freeman was. If I spill water on here, I'm going to be upset, but let me just keep going and say, this can happen when I try to stand before you and say, I am a man, I am a human being, and your reaction is to turn your weapons and the weapons of the state on me. Now, I will tell you that it was so tempting for me, because I'm the dean of a law school that right now is dealing with sincere advocates on both sides of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. I wanted to show you some photographs of how these people are treating one another. And maybe we can talk about that too, because I think that's dehumanization also, right? Even in the protests, right? But lest you think that the dehumanization of law has happened only historically, let me remind you that we're living dehumanization by law today, right? Some images just to remind you of that, right? What's the most basic need of any human being? To drink clear water, to breathe clear air. If you make a map of the places in the United States where there is not clean water and there is not clean air, they will be exactly contiguous upon neighborhoods that are poor, Black, Latino, and Native, right? How can we live with ourselves with that evidence of dehumanization? So prolific and so pervasive in the United States. How can we live with ourselves understanding that on the left, marijuana use is prevalent among whites and blacks at almost the same rate, right? And these data stop in 2019. The two bars, right? If you look at the yellow bar as used by whites on the left, and the white or the green bar as used by blacks on the right, right? The tips get closer and closer and closer over time. But the arrest rate for violations of marijuana law are vastly different, right? This is dehumanization. This is what it means to be in a society where law is bad for your health. So the answer to the question is, when is law bad for your health? Often, often. Whenever it dehumanizes other people and then institutionalizes that dehumanization. So the answer to the question is often. Now, how does it work to be bad for your health? Here I want to stop and tell you a story. These are my parents. My mother in this picture is 47. My father in this picture is 48. They are both just a little younger than me. And even though my father's slightly overweight, you would not guess that the next year after this picture, he's dead. Right? So my father dies at 49. My mother also died before I am the age I am, but I'm not telling, right? They were remarkable people to me, but not remarkable people demographically. Epidemiologically, they're not remarkable in any way, right? Because I grew up in the South Bronx, and everybody in the South Bronx who looked like them had this same life expectancy problem, right? Had the same comorbidities. Why? Because of the structural inequality that I've alluded to. The structural demographics, right? That made it so that in order for me to get a good education, my father had to work 4 jobs, my mother had to work 2 jobs. Why do I call that structural? Because none of those jobs paid a living wage. And my parents are unremarkable from that standpoint. We can tell the story right here, right now, today in Boulder, Colorado, right? Right here, right now in Boulder, Colorado, we can tell my parents' story. Not only were low wages characteristic, but if I had gone to the public schools in my neighborhood, as most of the kids in my neighborhood do, I couldn't have stood here today. right? And so for that reason, my parents worked those 6 jobs so that they could pay the $4,000 copay for my brother and I to not go to this school. This was PS 93. I went there through 4th grade. Concrete jungle, right? Fed into a intermediate school 123, that was condemned, closed, right? For school violence, more police officers than college counselors. 7 miles away, this is where I got to go to school. 7 miles. Do you know the life expectancy difference between where I lived and in Riverdale where this was? 20 years. 20 years. I'm not that old. That wasn't a long time ago. Right? And that's because of the structures of the fact that where I lived, there was not a major chain supermarket. So you couldn't find an A&P or Kroger or Safeway or Wegmans or any of that. Right? We had bodegas and convenience stores. Right? You could not find a part of my neighborhood where I didn't have to cross 3 interstate highways and breathe that air. Not here in Riverdale, right? These kinds of disparities exist right here in Colorado today, right? But in order to make sure that I could go here, here's what my father used to do. He used to get up in the morning and he used to go on the number 6 train. Anybody from New York City? Okay, the number 6 train, right, the IRT, down to Grand Central Station. I'm looking at you so you can verify that I've got the facts right? Go to IRT, worked at the Bowery Savings Bank 9 to 5, got on the same train, came home, walked down the street in my neighborhood, and he was the only guy with a suit and tie. I was so proud of him, right? He'd walk home, sit down, eat dinner, go to sleep 3 hours, get up and take the same train down so he could drive it, right? He was a motorman for the next 8 hours. That's how you die at 49, right? If either of those jobs gave him enough money to send me here, $4,000 a year, I don't know. He might not be alive today, but 49 would not have been his last year. Again, it's unremarkable. So, you guys have seen this chart before, and it talks about the determinants of health. Focus on 2 things. One, that clinical health, which we have really paid a lot of attention to. The Affordable Care Act was all about giving access to clinical health. Very important. I don't want to undo it, but let me tell you, that's 10% of the problem when we talk about dealing with health disparities and health inequalities. The real problem is that big slice of the pie that talks about the social and economic conditions that prevailed in the South Bronx where I lived, right? The air, the water, the food, the schools, the pay. Those are the things, the lack of housing, those are the things that determined my father would die at 49 and my mother would die at, all right, I'm going to say at 60, right? Those were the things that determined, right? And so the fact that we have paid a lot of attention, and believe me, I don't want to cast aspersions on this, the fact that we paid a lot of attention to the clinical disparities and making sure that we have insurance and equal access, very important. Understanding the disparities that were prevalent and produced this report. How many people know this report already? A lot of people know this report already, right? That's good stuff. But let me tell you what I want to work on for the rest of the time. I want to work on, ooh, they told me I could do this. I want to work on this box, right? I want to work on the inequality and the injustice that is pervasive, not only in social and economic factors, but also in health behaviors. A lot of people want to say it's your health behaviors that make you susceptible to disease and comorbidities. I'm so sorry that I don't play tennis after my 12-hour shift. And I'm really, really sorry that I can't take power walks down a street that's packed with violence, right? But I think these social and economic conditions are very important, not only because they are more determinative empirically, but also because unjust discrimination characterizes all of them. Unjust discrimination and inequality, that underlying dehumanization that is enabled by law, characterizes housing, education, access to food, environmental pollution, access to clean water, all of it. And that's why my view is that civil rights law is the most important health intervention that we can undertake if we're really serious about equalizing population health. Now, I could end here, but I won't. I'm going to keep talking, of course. And I want to talk about the fact that law is bad for our health when it denies equal access to the social determinants of health. Right? Keep my parents in mind. So which laws are these? This is where I want to take you to school for a minute. I'm going to focus on the inequity in access to education. Inequity in access to education. I think that's so fundamental to changing the dynamic of inequality in the social determinants of health that I want to suggest to you that unequal access to decent education. Now, this is what you think about immediately. You think about Ruby Bridges, trying to integrate with the Arkansas 9, and I'm going to, I guess, shake you up a little bit. I got the invitation. I might not get invited back, so I want to make the most of it, right? This is what we think about in order to keep ourselves comfortable, right? It was so long ago. We're so over this now. These historic pictures are gone, and what's remaining is people's personal choices. I'm so sorry, I disagree, right? We can tell you that law does some good things. Brown versus Board of Education, you know that decision. It helped a great deal. I bet you don't know Plyler versus Doe, which is the companion case that helped with Latino children. It helped a lot. But let me tell you today, this relationship between educational attainment and poor health outcomes is still pervasive. It is still the case that if you are a non-Hispanic white male, your life expectancy is 20 years longer on average because you are more likely to finish high school and college than if you are a black woman or black man, right? So the correlation between educational attainment, right, race and ethnicity is empirically clear. The correlation is clear, right? I'm going to suggest that the correlation between discrimination in education is not just a correlation, but a causation, right? For the social scientists in the room, you're going crazy, I know. A person who lacks basic elements of education is not fully healthy. That's the premise, right? That's the social determinant of health that I want to talk about. So the laws I want to focus on, because I'm going to be very critical of a very recent case, the laws I want to focus on are the laws that are bad for your health because they restrict equal access to education, right? Those laws are not gone. They're very present. And they're very with us. So how many of you know the details of the Students for Fair Admissions against Harvard and UNC? That's the case I want to close on. That's what I want to end on in terms of an example of when law can be bad for your health. Let me tell you, I can do this talk with recent housing cases. I can do this talk with recent school funding cases. I can do this talk with environmental protection cases. The reason I say that, I'm using education this time because it's pertinent to the topic that we're talking about generally, but the reason I say that is because at the end I'm going to say all of you can do something. All of you can do something about this problem if you buy my pitch. If you think I'm right, all of you can do something. And you can pick any part of the problem that you're passionate about to address. Mine is education right now. So what's the law? We're going to go to law school for about 2 or 3 minutes. The first legal foundational document that I need you to understand a little bit about is the United States Constitution. So this Constitution, immediately after the Civil War ended in 1865, quickly was amended with 3 amendments that we call the Reconstruction Era Amendments. All right, the Reconstruction Era Amendments, 13, 14, 15. Anybody know what any one of those, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, any one of them?
Equal protection.
Equal protection, that's the one I'm going to settle on, exactly right. 13th Amendment, anybody know? Okay, ended slavery, 15th Amendment made it possible for men that look like me, not me, but men that look like me to vote, right? Okay, so those are the Reconstruction Amendments. I'm going to focus on the 14th Amendment because it has something called the Equal Protection Clause in it. You want that term in order to understand the case. You want the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that contains the clause that says no state can deny equality under the law to any people based on their race, right? Doesn't that seem like a good idea and a straightforward one, right? We've had a lot of trouble enforcing this law. Okay, that's the constitutional law. That's the first thing you need to know. The next thing you need to know is the civil rights legislation that grows out of that constitutional provision. That constitutional provision is essentially an enabling amendment. It says now you can go pass a lot of legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right, to implement, right, to actualize this constitutional provision. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is also very straightforward. It says no person in the United States on the grounds of race, color, national origin can be excluded from the benefits, right? Can be excluded from the benefits of any program that accepts federal money. So put another way, the state government can't discriminate, right? State governments can't discriminate. That's what that law says. And you need both of those laws in order to understand what the Supreme Court has done in this law, this new law, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College and UNC. Those were the two most important laws that the Supreme Court was construing, interpreting, applying in this decision. And you know the holding of this decision, right? There were two schools that had race-conscious admissions, affirmative action, right? Remember I showed you the bucolic school that I went to, Fieldston? I am a product of their race-conscious admissions, right? I could not have gone to that school had they not said, we are here to extend the quality of education that we have been giving to white children for 72 years to people that look like her from the South Bronx. They had to make that conscious and affirmative decision. Same with Harvard, right? In my introduction, it sounds really good that I went to Harvard. Harvard had to make a decision, right? I couldn't pay. Parents, by this time, my father's dead, right? Couldn't pay. So Harvard had to make a conscious decision that there was a kid that came from the South Bronx who could finish Harvard and had some promise, but they had to go reach for me because I didn't have any, that's what affirmative action is. They had to reach for me because I didn't have any connections, right? Same with UVA Law School. They had to reach with me. What am I telling you? Affirmative action is why I get to stand here and talk to you today, right? And let me assure you with a certainty that I am not the first or the only person from the South Bronx that was smart enough to go to those schools. A lot of people got passed over because there wasn't affirmative action, right? So this decision says Harvard and UNC, your race-conscious program, violates the 14th Amendment. It violates the Equal Protection Clause, and it violates Title VI because you're discriminating against who? That's right, right? So it says the historic reason that we passed this statute during the Reconstruction period now should be flipped on its head so that we can make sure that we don't discriminate against whites. So it closed the door on 50 years of precedent. And during that 50 years, I got in, my brother got in, a lot of people like me got in, and the hopeful part, I think it's too late. I think it's too late to reverse. Even though the law is wrong, in my opinion, I think it's too late to reverse the good that the law did, right? I think there's too much good still to be done. It's the reason I'm still the dean of the GW Law School. After this past week, I'm like, I could quit easily. But I've got more people to let in, more people to train, and more people to help correct this law. And I'm not the only one. Because in this decision, there is a loophole, if you will. And it's the last paragraph of Section 6 of the opinion, if you decide to read it. And it says, nothing in this opinion shall be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his life or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. The reason I want you to hold on to this is because at the end, I'm going to give you a lot of things that you can do. And if all of them are too radical and too big, you can do this paragraph, right? You can do this paragraph where you work. You can hire people, train people, promote people, pay people differently, and do just this paragraph. Don't buy the hype that affirmative action is dead. It's not. That's what people want you to believe. That's what this court was hoping to accomplish. In fact, when you read the 6 opinions, because almost everybody wrote an opinion, right? of this decision. I commend a couple of them to you if you're really going to dig into this decision, right? Justice Thomas, if you want to see the most extreme anti-affirmative action view, irony is that you've got to read Clarence Thomas, right? I'm just going to go on and just leave that one and go to the next one, right? Neil Gorsuch in the middle. If you want to see why Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is under attack and is not assured, it is not assured that the Voting Rights Act will still exist in 5 years. It is not assured that the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, is that what time I have left? Yeah, it's not assured that these are going to read Justice Gorsuch's opinion. If you want to see the girl from the South Bronx throw down and explain to all of you people who believe in originalism, textualism, and the original meaning of the Constitution, Sonia Sotomayor will let you know how wrong you are. Her opinion will become the majority view in about 50 years. All right, I'm going to end and say, Justice Jackson's is the opinion, if you don't read any other, that you should read because it's an example of legal epidemiology. I'm going to go very fast through this because this says shut up. And Justice Jackson did this. She started with the law. She taught you about the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, and Title VI. And then she said, that law still does injustice and harm today, right? The law is still bad for you today, but she connected it to health. She connected it to health by using all the data that shows wealth gaps, income gaps, the earning gaps that killed my father early, right? She connected to education gaps that were the reason that my parents worked those 6 jobs, and then she connected it to the health outcomes. The fact that black children are exposed to elevated blood levels at 2 times the rate of white children, prostate cancer, the likelihood of mothers dying, babies dying in their first year of, I just got to do this one Colorado statistic because I remember this from when I taught at the University of Colorado. In Colorado, when I left in 2013, 14, 15, this was the data, right? This was the data. A black mother who makes $75,000 a year, middle income, and has a college education, has a 3.5 times more likelihood, is more likely to lose her baby in the first year of life than a white mother who has a high school education and lives below the poverty level. That's a race problem, people. That's not a socioeconomic problem. That's a race problem where you live with dehumanization every day of your life. Anyway, what she did, Justice Jackson did, was connect the health data to the law and show us what the problems are so that I could conclude that this decision, eliminating affirmative action, is bad for your health. What can you do? I'm going to skip this. You can view all structural inequality as dehumanization. Whenever you see it, it's dehumanization. You can advocate for civil rights as health rights. If you believe in health, you believe in civil rights, and it's your job to do so. People have done it. You can vigorously do what people did in this picture, right? To protect civil rights laws. They're under attack right now. You can protect equal access to education, whether you're a mom or dad in the PTA, and you see the black and brown kids are getting shunted off to juvie while the white kids are getting autism treatment. You can get up and say something about that, right? You can vote in a way that doesn't leave everybody black and brown on the seashore, right? This is a picture that just basically says, if you walk down the beach and you see one fish that's dead, you say something's wrong with the fish. If you see this, you say something's wrong with the ocean, right? And you can vote for civil rights, for the guy or gal that's going to protect civil rights, not the guy or gal that's going to protect your pocket. Health is a byproduct of justice. We're all in this together. Thanks very much.
If you want, you can just stand up with your questions.
Do you have any time? Okay.
So, questions? Over here, Larry.
Yeah. First, I have to say, you're welcome back next year. Okay. Forever, for all the next years. Thank you so much. And it's a really interesting perspective, and I hesitate to ask this question because it's not a legal question. But it seems to me that underlying a lot of the harms that you point out, the dehumanization of others, can be traced to economics rather than law. And I'm curious if you think that that needs as much reform, and if there's as much to do there.
My question, Larry.
I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say yes and no because it's a chicken and egg situation. One of the reasons that the laws in our country are structured the way they are is to protect our economic system, our interest in preserving property, profit. Our legal system is definitely structured around capitalism. There's no question about that. So yes, in that way. The reason I hesitate to say yes without a qualification is because it invites people to imagine that all we have to do is address socioeconomic inequality to resolve the racial inequality that we're experiencing. I'm not saying that they're not coincident. They overlap without question. If you've ever seen that study, there's a beautiful study by Bruce Phelan and Joe Link that talks about fundamental causes and identifies racism, right? Like Dewey was talking about, racism as a fundamental cause of inequality, right? And they have this Venn diagram that says we can solve a lot of it with socioeconomic economic interventions, but not all of it. Can't explain why mom who's black and middle class loses her baby before mom who's white and lower class. You can't explain that with just socioeconomic fixes. So we have to reckon with the fact that at bottom, our legal system, I mean, the reason I looked for the 13th Amendment, at bottom, our legal system is built on racial discrimination, right? To protect an economic system, right, clearly, but it's built on racial discrimination.
One in the back there. Do you have a mic? If you have a question, put your hand up so we can get a mic to you while we're waiting.
So one of the other issues in terms of black women, higher socioeconomic status, losing their babies more often, I think relates to the care and how seriously they're taken by physicians.
Yeah.
And I think we also need to think about training physicians in how they treat people of different races and women in general
God, yeah.
differently than males are treated. And I think that's another issue that, so I guess I didn't have a question, more of a comment, but I think we need to look at that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wish I had, time to make 20 recommendations because that's an example of, there's a silly adage that says, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You can find any piece of the problem in your sphere, in your space to address, and that's a really important one, right? Biased healthcare delivery is a huge driver of health inequality, right? And one of the first steps is to recognize that to be biased is to be human, right? That you don't have to be a bigot or a racist or a prejudiced, you don't have to wear a pointy white hat in order to have racial bias because it's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, right? It's just, that's another talk altogether. But if you are a provider, a clinician of any sort, and you recognize that when you walk into a room, we have data that tell us when the dyad between a relationship, a patient and a physician is a non-racially concordant dyad, right? I'm black, you're white, you're my physician, you see your history, you see what was on the television last night, you see what your grandmother told you over Thanksgiving dinner, and you react to that patient by distancing yourself physically, making less eye contact. Empirically, we know that your conversation is more verbally dominant with that patient than it would be with a white patient because we've recorded you, we've coded the recordings, right? This is the work out of Johns Hopkins that Lisa Cooper has done and others, right? We know, for example, that even when you look at empirical data, right, that should be objective, right? The numbers don't lie, right? You interpret it differently because of biased social cues that you've gotten all your life. But the good news is that we can counteract those if you will admit it, right? If you will admit it. And if you will admit that it's an ongoing project, right? It's not spend 3 weeks in a tearful journaling experience with a black person in the front of the room and you're done, right? That's not what we need. We need the same kind of vigilance that we use to protect people's privacy, right? You have to recertify every year HIPAA. You have to have a HIPAA compliant plan and training in place. Anti-bias healthcare would go a long way to equalizing those numbers.
On. There we go. Stephen Pollock. Just two things. One, to reinforce what you've just said. There was a study done. It was very interesting, a large regional urban hospital system. At one hospital, mean blood pressure was one level. Another hospital was higher. The other hospital happened to be in a poorer area, mostly people of color in that particular area. And they said, oh yeah, that's, just how they are. More problems, this and that. The fact was that wasn't. The two hospitals measured blood pressure differently.
Yes.
That was the only difference.
Yeah.
But all of behavior of that health system assumed that basically fit into the stereotypes of the population. It was quite remarkable.
Yeah.
The second thing, I have this thing about education, which is critically important. It pisses me off no end that the state education, a public educational system, has been so fragmented, attacked, resources not put in. I've posted about this then. What amazes me is the mind is a terrible thing to waste. My first job out of college is I was a police homicide reporter in Chicago. So it was quite an interesting experience. But kids, even kids in the gangs, really bright people. I mean, it's just amazing what people do. But we waste people. And we waste people in a very competitive world, which is very dangerous, actually, because we fight amongst one another. Now, just getting back to healthcare, I grew up around a concept called social medicine. I won't go into why that is. But social medicine in my training was 3 components. Last was cure. Second to last was prevention. First was community. Healthcare is a community endeavor. Food, how we produce it, how we bring it in. As you may know from the history of the community health center movement here in Mississippi, the physicians initially prescribed food, and they were hounded. They were not allowed to prescribe food, so they helped people to grow their own food. But if you could talk about education a little bit in this fragmentation and how we move from where we are to somewhere different, that would be very helpful.
I want to just really quickly say I'm going to spend a lot of time on Dr. Freeman's website because I think contact theory explains why integrated education is still so important. If I go to school with you and live in your neighborhood, I see that you cry when I cry, you laugh when I laugh, you become human to me, and that dehumanization becomes more and more difficult. So that's why I think education is so important as an entry point or an intervention point over the long term. So I would say contact theory probably explains that.
Up there?
Hi, I am so curious to know what your thoughts are on the school voucher laws that are being instituted, especially considering your educational background.
Yeah, they're evolving. My views are evolving because I had so much, I think, hope for public education. And I think public education is the way that we ensure social mobility in this society. But I do believe that equal access to quality education is under attack through voucher laws.
Yep.
Right? And so I do believe that there's a tension by removing the resources and disinvesting in public school systems that would be accessible for all, so that we can, in the name of choice, give less and less educational attainment to people that are most vulnerable in our society. So I'm troubled by that, right? And that's at the K through 12 level. Just so you know, because I can never resist an opportunity to be provocative, that's why 3 women were called to account as presidents of colleges in front of Congress, and no men. right? That's why the only people who are losing their jobs right now are new women presidents, because higher education is under serious attack, right? And that's the reason that is behind SFFA versus UNC. I sound like a conspiracy theorist. The lady came up and she waved her hands and she said, they're all after us. They are all after us, right? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you, right? And so my hope is that I can deputize you. I have a complex relationship with the voucher laws.
So let's go to Meredith up here.
Hi, Dayna, I have a comment, not really, not a question, but I have to admit to you I'm very embarrassed, and I wanted to apologize to you that I did not put your books in the program. So I feel terrible about that, because they're actually the books that I've read, which is really silly that I haven't. So I wanted to give a plug. If you want to learn more, if you want to be better, if you want to spend money where it counts, where it matters, I would say buy Dayna's books, Just Mercy and Just Health. They're hard to read. I actually listened to them on audio tape, but they're important and they're beautiful.
That's really nice of you. Thank you.
What happens in November?
Okay.
This is my. I don't mean to ask you. I don't mean to ask you to make the choice, but I'm a Brit. I've lived here for 30 years, and this is the first time I'm actually considering not voting, because I can't stand either
You have to
candidate.
vote.
Yeah, but in Massachusetts, it's a pointless exercise. That's not the problem. And so you've spent a lot of time looking back, and you're a scholar of the law, so you know what's happened in the past. My problem is what's happening in the future,
Yeah.
not what's happening in the past.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do about it?
Okay, so you have to vote, and here's why. Those pictures I showed you of dogs chasing people, if you think about Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where people were trampled by horses that didn't want to do that, I learned, right? The fact is that we've lived in worse times and people fought harder so that we could keep going now. It's not the time to give up. It's not the time to stand down. So when I think about why I get to be here, my mother and my father, they left the South Bronx. My parents lived in a totally had a totally segregated upbringing, right? If you think about what it took for them to walk out of their house and go 7 miles up to Fieldston, I remember my mother used to be trembling. She didn't know any white people. She simply did not know any white people. By the way, the most efficient way to preserve racism is residential segregation. It's highly efficient, right? Because it makes sure your school is different from my school, and my supermarket is different from your supermarket, and your playground is different from mine. We have no contact theory, and it's easier to dehumanize one another, right? We have to vote at the local level for people that are going to protect schools. We have to vote at the local level for people that are going to make housing affordable for everyone, so we don't have enclaves of rich and white people completely segregated from anybody unlike them. We have to make it possible for people to have zoning laws that make food available to everyone and clean air available to everyone. And that's about voting. The only way we got SFFA, reversing 50 years of precedent that made it possible for me to go to the schools we got, is because people stayed home and didn't vote for Hillary. That's why we got that decision. If he wins again, sorry, am I not supposed to do this?
That's okay.
I certainly couldn't do this at home. I'm a dean, please don't quote. I'm not supposed to do this. Oh my God, I'm in so much
This is being
trouble.
recorded,
Right, okay, so there you go. I've said what I had to say, but please do vote. You must vote.
Okay, Dayna, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Since I have all the mics. You've talked about how law impacts certain groups, and particularly people of color. I wondered how you could talk a little bit about how you see some of these, abortion laws impacting people in states where they really are going to impact people's health, and how you think about that and how we should be thinking about that.
Yeah, so I pick an area of the law, civil rights law, that I'm an expert in, so that I can be I can go deep and knowledgeably about that law. But I'm going to tell you, all law impacts all people. And when we think of the society that we want to be, and we don't like where we are, some of what we can do differently is change the laws that dehumanize people, right? some of what we can do differently, right? And there's so many laws. You said
Yeah.
abortion law, there's so many laws that dehumanize people. But the thing I want to suggest about your question, that I think you may not have meant to ask, but I do want to make this point, is that when I talk about civil rights law for the betterment of health, obviously I want my health to be better and my children's health and the people that look like me to be better. But I want you to know that bad law that protects unjust discrimination founded in dehumanization hurts all of us. Right? It hurts all of us, not just in some sort of existential theoretical way we're not in the society we want to be. I think that's true. But we have lots of empirical data that show us, right, that if you live in a geographic area where people search for the N-word frequently, like we scrape their Twitter data or their Google searches, and you and I, white, black, brown, yellow, green, we live shorter lives. We have a higher rate of myocardial infarction, right? We have a higher rate of infant mortality because we live with racial discrimination, right? So I want this to be an us-we problem. That's why this picture, right? These look like redwood trees. Usually when I'm in Colorado, I use aspen trees because also the same thing is true of them. They look like they're individually strong and individual organisms. They're not, they're connected underground. Their root system is completely connected. And so I want to try and convince an audience that mostly would, because of the goodness of your heart, want to help people who look like me, or who are Latino, or who are immigrants, or who are poor. Because poor whites, I got to tell you, are in the same condition that poor blacks are in. They don't realize it because your guy that you will put in if you don't vote, right, makes it look like we've got really different interests. We don't have different interests. All of us are in this together.
Okay, we have time for just a couple more questions. Is this on? Here, we have a professional.
I think I have an easy question. I heard it in the media that law schools only give, I think, 1 semester of ethics in the entire education of the student. I'm not sure if that's true or not, and I just wanted to see if you could comment on that at all. Because for us, for my family personally, we're involved in a lot of legal stuff, and it seems like ethics is kind of a joke, sorry, but
Yeah.
that's what it seems like. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's even less than 1 semester, I'm sorry to say. There's only 1 mandatory course in most curricula that are what we call professional responsibility and ethics, and it's the ethics of being a lawyer, you know, QSI. I will say that there are courses, I'm not the only one that teaches them, but I have a course that's called Public Health Law, Policy, and Ethics, right? And I did teach bioethics. Ironically, Justice Neil Gorsuch used to be on the 10th Circuit before he came. He ascended to the Supreme Court, and he taught a bioethics course at the University of Colorado, and I was his boss. So it's really fun for me to go to him and say, what are you thinking, right? And so there are electives in ethics and jurisprudence, but only 1 required course in most legal curricula that go to that issue.
Should there be more?
Not looking like the ones we've got. You know, that's a hard question for me, right? Because what it would look like, I'm not sure.
Look, we have Tom,
Hi,
and then...
hi,
maybe
Tom
we have
Check. You spoke very eloquently about the, doctor treating different patients differently based on their own experiences and their prejudices. And I wondered if having more black doctors
Yes.
or more doctors of color, does that only partially solve this problem? If they go to a white-dominated medical school, do they end up coming out with some of the same prejudices, or is that a good solution, do you think?
There's no single solution, there's no magic bullet to the complex problems that we're talking about. But a more diverse health workforce would make a huge difference, a huge difference. And I say that not just for black and white, right? So thank you for allowing me to talk about Just Medicine, which is the book that talks about discrimination within the clinical encounter. Some of the interviews that I did, the qualitative interviews for that, were among immigrant families that just got better understanding from their providers if they knew that you can't tell me to put milk in my diet. You can't tell me to do that on a day that I'm eating, I don't do dairy and meat together. So these sort of concordant dyads really do improve patient satisfaction, therefore the continuity of care, the trust relationship builds, and the treatment decisions are better. So it doesn't solve the whole problem, but it does make a very, very big difference. Notwithstanding the fact that, yes, going to school in a predominantly white medical institution will come with its own biases as well. But then another piece of the puzzle might be introducing the public health curriculum into medical education so that people begin to understand that in addition, when they get out into practice, in addition to screening for your family's medical history, we should also screen for whether you ate last week, right? Whether you are spending more than 30% of your income on rent so that you're house poor and therefore can't buy, for example, trumpet lessons for your kid. Right? Whether you experienced violence last year is as important a screen as getting your health history. So we could educate differently, educate different people, and chip away at this problem from various vantages.
So let's thank Dayna for another terrific talk.